Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen. So a while back I did a two-part video of my favorite TV quotes, and I thought it was about time I did the same for my favorite movie quotes. So this is my favorite movie quotes, part one. And I'm gonna jump right in because I have a lot of quotes here. So my first one is from the 80s classic, Ferris Bueller. I really love 80s movies, if you cannot tell by my John Hughes shirt. And so I have a fair amount of quotes from some 80s classics. So starting off with Ferris Bueller, I've got, the question isn't, what are we going to do? The question is, what aren't we going to do? Ferris is a real character that I can aspire towards because he's super adventurous and a great character for us introverts to look up to. Next, I have a quote from Pirates of the Caribbean. So the character Will Turner says, "This is either madness or brilliance." And Captain Jack Sparrow replies, "It's remarkable how often those two traits coincide." And going back to Ferris Bueller, I have probably the most famous quote from the movie. "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around every once in a while, you might miss it." Next, I have a quote from the Pixar classic, Cars, which I think is a very underappreciated Pixar movie. So the quote is a conversation between Sally and Lightning McQueen, and Sally says, "Back then, cars came across the country in a whole different way." And McQueen asks, "How do you mean?" And Sally replies, "Well, the road didn't cut through the land like that interstate. It moved with the land. It rose, it fell, it curved. Cars didn't drive on it to make great time. They drove on it to have a great time." I have a lot of nostalgia for Cars, and I wish people liked that one more. And this quote itself is also full of nostalgia. Next, I have another Pixar classic, The Incredibles, and this quote is from Edna Mode. And she very dramatically says, "I never look back, darling. It distracts from the now." Next, I have a quote from The Dark Knight Rises, and it's a conversation between Jim Gordon and Batman. And if you haven't seen the movie, it might be a little bit spoilery. So Jim Gordon says, "I never cared who you were." Batman replies, "I know." Jim Gordon says, "But shouldn't the people of Gotham know who the hero was that saved their city?" And Batman replies, "A hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple as putting a coat around a little boy's shoulders to let him know that the world hadn't ended." And Jim Gordon asks, "Bruce Wayne?" So this is a lovely quote about how anyone can be a hero, and also it's a fun way for Batman to reveal his identity to Jim Gordon. Next, I have two quotes from Joe Dirt. Joe Dirt is a funny, silly comedy that some people might think is stupid, but I love the movie and I think it has a lot of heart. So the first quote is, "Life's a garden, dig it," which is just a fun, very tiny little quote. And then the other quote is, "Home is where you make it," which is sort of the theme of the movie. Next, I have a bunch of quotes from Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. This is a very quotable movie. It's a super cute movie starring Natalie Portman and Dustin Hoffman. And Dustin Hoffman's character owns like a magic toy shop, and it's just an adorable, heartwarming movie that I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. And some of these quotes might be spoilery, but Mr. Megorium is the magical shop owner of this toy shop, and in the movie he's passing it down to Natalie Portman's character. So this first quote is, "I fell so completely in love with these shoes. I bought enough pairs to last me my whole lifetime. This is my last pair." So this next one is kind of a long one, but it goes, "When King Lear dies at the end of Act 5, do you know what Shakespeare has written? He's written, he dies. That's all, nothing more. No fanfare, no metaphor, no brilliant final words. The culmination of the most influential work of dramatic literature is, he dies. It takes Shakespeare, a genius, to come up with, he dies. And yet, every time I read those two words, I find myself overwhelmed with dysphoria. And I know it's only natural to be sad, but not because of the words, he dies, but because of the life we saw prior to the words. I've lived all 5 of my acts, Mahoney, and I am not asking you to be happy that I must go. I'm only asking that you turn the page, continue reading, and let the next story begin. And if anyone asks what became of me, you relate my life in all its wonder and end it with a simple and modest, he died. Very emotional quote. And then the next quote I have is very silly and fun, which is kind of what this movie is all about. So in this one, it's a conversation between Mr. Megorium and his new accountant. So Mr. Megorium says, "The hot dog bun ratio. Why, for the love of mustard, are there never enough buns?" The accountant replies, "Extra hot dogs." Mr. Megorium says, "Yes, but why?" And the accountant replies, "In case you drop one." To which Mr. Megorium says, "What kind of insufferable fool drops a hot dog?" And the accountant says, "Anything can happen, sir." And so Mr. Megorium says, "Anything can happen. How absolutely true. You're exactly the mutant I'm looking for. You're hired." So yeah, this movie is just full of those kind of whimsical, hilarious conversations, which hopefully all of this long conversations, I don't usually have quotes in these videos that are such long back and forth conversations. Hopefully that's not annoying or making you lose track of the quotes. Anyways, moving on, we have another conversation between Mr. Megorium and his new accountant. So Mr. Megorium says, "I've been inventing toys since the 1770s. And the accountant says, "What, excuse me?" And Mr. Megorium says, "Yes." And the accountant says, "You say the 1770s? And Mr. Megorium says, "Yes, sir, so you can imagine accounting is a brand new concept to me." So the accountant says, "You know that would make you at least 240 years old, sir." And Mr. Megorium replies, "You're already hired, mutant. There's no need to show off." Again, I cannot get enough of these whimsical conversations. And the accountant's seriousness in the face of these very strange conversations makes it all the funnier. And that's it for my Mr. Megorium quotes. I had rather a lot of them. And we're back to Pirates of the Caribbean, and we have a quote from Jack Sparrow. And the quote is, "The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem." And then my final 3 quotes are all from the movie Lincoln. So the first quote is from when they're voting on the passing of the 13th Amendment. And so the clerk says, "The speaker may vote if he so chooses." And Pendleton, who's taking down the votes, replies, "It is highly unusual, sir." And the clerk replies, "This isn't usual, Mr. Pendleton. This is history." And I think that's a great moment that kind of highlights that you should really make your voice be heard on important issues. And then the next quote I have is a little speech from Lincoln that I think is a really clever little speech. And it goes, "The part assigned to me is to raise the flag, which, if there be no fault in the machinery, I will do. And when up, it shall be for the people to keep it up. That's my speech." And I don't know whether or not this is a real speech from Lincoln. It's in the movie, but I really like it. And the next quote is also from Abraham Lincoln, and it is during a conversation, not a speech, so even less likely that it's a direct quote. But again, I don't really know. But anyways, he says, "A compass, I learned when I was surveying, it'll point you true north from where you're standing, but it's got no advice about the swamps and deserts and chasms that you'll encounter along the way. If, in pursuit of your destination, you plunge ahead heedless of obstacles and achieve nothing more than to sink in a swamp, what is the point of knowing true north?" So yeah, that was my first part in my favorite movie quotes little mini series that I'm doing here. Part 2 will be coming next month. I hope you enjoyed part 1. Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.